Hey, what's up everyone? My name's Chris Winter and today I'm going to do an in-depth review and comparison of three very popular budget prime lenses from Canon. The 50mm f1.8, the 40mm f2.8 STM, and its baby brother, the new 24mm f2.8 STM. Now these three prime lenses are all very good, they all have their pros and cons, so what I'm going to do is do some image samples for you, do some autofocus tests, and pretty much just compare these lenses to find out which one's the best for you. Now, I'd just like to thank the guys over at Brisbane Camera Hire for letting me rent these out for a few days. But anyway, let's get into it and find out which one is the best lens. So let's start off by talking about the build quality. We have three different lenses here, but two of them are very similar. To start off, we have the 24mm and the 40mm STM. These are both Pancake lenses, which means that they're very small. And if you look at these lenses, it's quite difficult to actually distinguish which one's which. This one here is the 24mm, the new one, and this is the 40mm, which has been out for around about 2 years. Then we have the 50mm f1.8. Now this is a bigger lens, but it actually doesn't feel like it's that much bigger because it's quite light. Now this is known as the Plastic Fantastic or Nifty 50, and there's a good reason for that. It's because it's actually not built that well. It's all plastic, and it feels like you could break this lens quite easily. In fact, I have broken one of these lenses, and you never really want to be breaking a lens. On the other hand, we have the 24 and the 40, and these feel like they're built very, very solidly. Although they're quite small, they are built really out of a nice material, a nice metal finish, and they both have really nice focus rings. Very, very similar and very smooth. So I do think that that's one of the positives of the 24 and the 40. On the other hand, we have the 50, which has got a plasticky and not very nice focus ring, so if you are trying to do any manual focus with this, it's often quite difficult. Now if you haven't seen it yet guys, I've also created a top 10 list of the best DSLR lenses you can get for under $300. It's definitely worth checking out, and I'll put a link in the description box below, so click that and check it out. So let's talk about the field of view of these lenses, what you're actually going to see. Now we have three different lenses here. We've got the 50, the 40 and the 24. Which might not seem like a big difference in focal length, but it actually is once you get it onto your camera, especially if using a crop censored camera. Now what I'm going to do is put each of these lenses onto my Canon 70D so you can get an idea of what each focal length is like and which one's to your liking. So let's get onto that and see how different each of these lenses are. So right now I'm using the Canon 24mm f2.8, and as you can see there's a lot more room in the shot. So you've got to take this into consideration when you want to be choosing these lenses. This lens can be really good for some street photography because you're going to be getting quite a lot in. But if you really want to, with this 24mm, you can get quite close. So you can still get some nice background blur or bokeh. But if you want, you can also have quite a lot in your frame. So let's move over to the 40mm. Okay, so right now I've changed over to the 40mm f2.8, and as you can see, it's a little bit more zoomed in and there's a little bit less space in the frame. Now this might be a nice focal length, say if you're at a party or something, but you've got to remember that you don't want to be in too small of a room because that 40mm focal length can mean that it can be a little bit difficult to get everyone in the frame. So here we are with the Canon 50mm f1.8, and as you can see there's a big difference. I'm all up in your face, pretty much filling this entire screen, and compared to the 24mm there's quite a big difference. Now this could be a really good focal length. Say if you want to get some photos at a party or something like that where you don't want to get in people's way, you can stand in the background and get some nice photos because of that 50mm focal length. You'll also probably notice that the background here is a little bit more blurred out than with the 24 and the 40mm. That's one of the benefits of having that longer focal length. But as you can see, this was the 24mm, this was the 40mm, and back onto me, this is the 50mm. So take these into consideration when you're thinking about which lens would be right for you. Hey guys, if you're enjoying this video, I'd love it if you leave a thumbs up because that's always appreciated. Anyway, let's get on to the next part of the video. Now let's talk about macro photography and the minimum focus distance of these three lenses. Now none of these lenses are dedicated macro lenses, and if you really want to get into that kind of photography, I'd recommend the 100mm macro from Canon. But we'll just test them out and see which one performs well and how they perform differently. So we're going to start off with the 24mm. And this one has the smallest minimum focus distance of just 16 centimeters. So as you can see, you can get really quite close with the Canon 24mm. It's quite an odd focal length for a macro shot, but you can see that you can get some really nice shots and it is very sharp. We'll now move over to the 40mm, which has a 30 centimeter minimum focus distance. So can focus there, And we're around about there is the minimum. And it's still a nice shot, but not as close in as the other one. And then we'll move over to the 50mm, which has a 45 centimeter minimum focus distance. So we have to be all the way back here to be able to focus. And that's the shot from the 50mm. So I've got to say, if you want to be doing some macro photography, you're just getting into it, I definitely recommend the 24mm because it has a very small minimum focus distance. So now let's talk about autofocus speed for stills mode. Now the 50mm f1.8 is notorious for having quite a loud autofocus and quite a slow autofocus. So what I'm going to do right now is try and focus on a few different objects here on my table, and we'll see how the 50.8 performs. So listen out for the confirmation beep. So you can definitely hear the autofocus. It can be quite snappy, but it's definitely not the fastest autofocus that I've used. Okay, now I've got the 40mm f2.8 STM on, and this has got that STM motor which is meant to work pretty well, so let's test out how this works. Oh, there's a massive difference already. You can really just tell that this is very snappy. There's still a little bit of a sound, a little bit of a whirring sound every time it tries to focus, but autofocus is almost instantaneous with this. A big difference from the 50.8. Last but not least, let's test out the 24mm f2.8 STM lens. This is definitely the fastest of all the lenses. There's almost no time and no delay. And it's definitely the quietest as well. There's almost no sound. It's pretty impressive, especially on a crop sensitive camera. Now to be fair, this 24mm is the widest lens of all these three lenses, so it's a little bit easier for it to lock onto focus. But if I was to choose a winner, the 24mm is the fastest autofocus performing lens. Now we're going to do something a little bit different, and we're going to test out the autofocus performance in video mode. I've got this paired up with my Canon 70D, and you're currently seeing the 24mm f2.8. So let's test out just how fastly and smoothly these lenses work. So as you can see, this is all done in autofocus with that new STM motor. And the 24mm has no problems. And as you can hear, no sound because I've got the microphone right close next to it. So what I'll do is put on the Canon 40mm and we'll see how that turns out. Okay, so we've got the 40mm which also has that STM motor. And it is pretty much the exact same speed in video autofocus as the 24mm. It's having no problems, no hunting, a little bit of noise, but probably not enough for you guys to be able to pick it up. Last but not least, we've got the 50mm f1.8. And as you can see, it's a little bit slower in autofocus, but it is able to actually autofocus quite well, just a little bit noisier. Not sure if you're actually able to hear that, but there is kind of a grinding noise every time it does try and autofocus. Now I always think it's important to check out a few sample images of these different lenses. First off, we've got the 50mm f1.8, and as you can see, you can get some really stunning shots with this lens because it's got that longer focal length and that wide f1.8 aperture. You can get some fantastic portraits and really isolate your subject with this lens. Next off, we've got the 40mm f2.8. It can also take some really nice shots. It doesn't have that really blurry background like you're getting with the 50.8, but you can definitely still get some nice bokeh with it, and it's a little bit more versatile. Finally, we have the 24mm f2.8, which has been one of my favorite lenses, especially for street photography, because you can pretty much get everything in the subject, and there's not a lot of times where that 24mm is going to be too long of a focal length. So if you're really looking for a lens which you can use all the time, I've been very happy with the 24mm. So there you go guys, that was my review and comparison of these three budget prime lenses. Which one's the winner? Well, it really depends on what kind of photography style you like. If you want the best image quality and to do some really nice portraits, I'd absolutely go for the 50mm f1.8. This one here probably does have the best image quality. You're going to get that beautiful background blur and you can really isolate your subject. It does lose a little bit in its build quality, but if you look after it and you're careful with it, you'll be very happy with that lens. If you want to do any video work, I'd recommend either of the two STM lenses, probably the 24mm f2.8 STM lens, because this one here is a little bit wider and it's easier to handhold. Now, if you want a fast performing autofocus lens, I'd probably go for the 40mm f2.8 because you're probably going to be shooting at f2.8 anyway with most of these lenses. So this one here is a fantastic lens for those portraits. You're not going to get as much background blur like the 50mm f1.8, but the 40mm is definitely a good all-rounder. Now, if you want one lens which you can stick on your camera and keep there the whole time, I'd definitely go for the 24mm f2.8. In fact, this is the lens I probably use the most. It's a fantastic new lens. It's got a really fast autofocus performance. It's very sharp. There's not much that I can fault about this lens. In fact, this is definitely one of my favorites. So there you go, guys. They're all really good lenses. Canon have done a really good job. You're very lucky that there are so many at this budget price. And yeah, I've been very happy with them all. Now, if you did like this video and you've still stuck around for the 12 minutes that I've been making this video, I'd appreciate it if you leave a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a great day. Bye.